The vitals monitor in the Colton nursery had been trending the wrong direction for 11 days straight. Baby Archer, 3 months old, heir to a $3 billion real estate empire carved out of Lower Manhattan brick by brick, was starving. The finest neonatologists Johns Hopkins could dispatch had failed. Lactation specialists flown in from the Mayo Clinic had failed. Every premium formula on the market, every carefully sourced donor milk from private banks in New York and Boston. Archer rejected it all with a violence that left the rotating staff of night nurses pale and shaken. His body refused to keep anything down. His weight had dropped to the point that Dr. Fielding, the lead pediatric specialist Graham Colton, had put on a 6-figure monthly retainer, had asked to speak privately with the estate's head of legal. Graham Colton understood what that meant. He'd been in enough high-stakes rooms to know when someone was managing liability instead of solving a problem. His digestive system is in systemic distress, Mr. Colton. Dr. Fielding had told him that morning, mopping his forehead in the dim light of Graham's study on the East Wing. Graham had simply stared at the man. Fielding was one of the top 5 pediatric specialists in the country. He had published, he had keynoted. He was, in theory, the person you called when every other option was exhausted. We've run every panel available. There is no diagnosable cause for the degree of nutrient rejection we're seeing. He's 3 months old and his body is simply... Fielding paused. It's shutting down, sir. You have perhaps 72 hours before his organs begin to reflect it. Graham hadn't said a word. He'd set down his coffee, walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the Colton estate's private coastline in East Hampton, and stood there until the doctor left the room. He could buy the land under any hospital in the state. He could not buy 1 ounce of weight onto his son's bones. 3 months ago, his wife Charlotte had died on the operating table at 37 weeks. An undetected placental abruption, catastrophic fast. The surgeons had delivered Archer in the final window of viability. Graham had held his son for the first time in a recovery room that still smelled like antiseptic and failed prayers. Charlotte had never held him at all. Graham had buried his wife in the rain. Then he'd brought his premature son home and told himself the only thing a Colton knew how to do: push forward, build, protect. He was failing at the only thing that mattered. Brooke Larson had been at the estate for 3 days and had already memorized every corner of the West Wing she was assigned to clean. That was the thing about institutional cleaning work. The silence of it, the repetition, gave your mind nowhere to hide from itself. She scrubbed baseboards. She polished brass fixtures that probably cost more than 3 months of her old salary. She kept her head down, her uniform pressed, and her chest bound so tightly beneath the stiff white collar of the temp agency's standard issue shirt that breathing required a conscious effort. Brooke had been a certified lactation consultant and pediatric floor nurse at Westchester Medical for 4 years. She'd had a gift for it, the particular patience required to sit with a new mother at 2 in the morning and coax a struggling newborn through that first successful latch. She'd been good at her job in a way that felt like a vocation, not just a paycheck. That was before Shane. She'd met Shane Brannock, small-time, charming, catastrophically bad at staying out of trouble, at a friend's birthday party 2 years ago. By the time she understood the full shape of who he was, she was pregnant, and he owed $40,000 to people who did not negotiate payment plans. The shove down the back stairs of their apartment building had happened on a Thursday in February, during one of his rages after a bad run at the card tables on the West Side. Brooke had been 36 weeks pregnant. Her daughter May had lived for 9 days in the NICU. 9 days of incubators and beeping machines, and Brooke pressing her hand through the porthole of the isolette to touch a foot the size of her thumb. 9 days, and then a silence she had no architecture to hold. Shane had not come to the hospital. He had not come to the burial. 2 weeks later, he'd called to tell her the loan sharks were now coming for her too, using her address as his contact location. She'd taken the temp agency job through a service that asked no questions, because she needed cash fast and her nursing license was in suspension. Shane had filed a false report with the board claiming she'd been skimming medication from her unit. The investigation was ongoing. She was, professionally and personally, nothing. A woman who had loved a child who didn't exist anymore, whose body hadn't gotten the message yet. Her milk came in with a pressure that woke her up at night, a physical grief that painkillers barely touched. She wrapped herself tighter. She kept moving. On her 3rd night, Brooke took a wrong turn in the north corridor looking for the supply closet and ended up outside a door she hadn't noticed before. A nursery, she realized, from the soft mechanical beeping leaking through the gap at the threshold. A night nurse's voice, low and strained, saying something about the next scheduled attempt in 40 minutes. And then a sound that stopped Brooke cold. Not a cry, exactly. More like the absence of one, a thin, breathless searching from something too small and too tired to produce a proper cry. A baby rooting in the dark, looking for something it had never once been given. Brooke pushed the door open before she made a conscious decision to do so. The room was dim, lit in soft blue from the monitors. A woman in her 50s, Henley per her badge, was slumped in the chair by the window, eyes half closed, phone in her lap. In the center of the room, in a crib that probably cost $10,000 and had the best organic cotton sheets money could buy, was the smallest baby Brooke had seen outside a NICU. He was hooked to a pulse ox monitor and a hydration drip. His tiny hands were clenched into fists. His face was scrunched in that particular anguish of a newborn who has been hungry so long that hunger is the only thing he knows. He was rooting, head turning side to side, mouth opening and closing. He was asking, in the only language he had, for the one thing no specialist in the country had been able to give him. Her voice came out fractured. I know exactly. She crossed the room in 4 steps. She eased around the monitoring equipment with the practiced efficiency of 4 years, on a pediatric floor, reached into the crib and lifted him with a particular careful confidence of someone who had done this 10,000 times. He was so light it scared her, lighter than May had been even in those first days. Brooke sat on the edge of the window seat, her back to the sleeping nurse. Her chest was a wall of pressure and grief. Her hands were shaking. She knew what she was doing. She also knew she was the only person in this building who could do it. She turned away, unbuttoned her collar, unwound the binding. She guided the baby's face to her skin. For a terrible suspended second, nothing. And then Archer Colton, heir to $3 billion and 11 days of failed science, found what he had been searching for. He latched on. His tiny jaw began to work. The rhythm was weak at first, uncoordinated, the effort of something that had been fighting for a very long time. But it steadied, it deepened. Brooke pressed her free hand over her mouth to keep the sound inside. Tears fell from her face onto his dark hair. He was warm and real and alive against her chest. He smelled like expensive baby powder, and the particular sweetness of a newborn still brand new to the world. She was so entirely lost in the miracle of it that she didn't hear the door. Step away from my son. The voice was quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't calm, the kind on the other side of calm, where emotion has been compressed into something harder than anger. Do it now. Brooke went completely still. She lifted her head. Graham Colton stood in the doorway in dark trousers and a rumpled dress shirt, sleeves pushed to the elbows. He was holding a compact, semi-automatic at a level that told her he knew exactly what he was doing with it. Behind him, 2 men in dark clothing filled the hall. Nurse Henley lurched awake with a sharp gasp. Mr. Colton, I just closed my eyes for a moment. She must have slipped in. Graham didn't look at the nurse. His eyes were fixed on Brooke, and they were the color and temperature of winter concrete. I will ask you once, he said. What are you doing to my son? Brooke did not set the baby down. Every instinct she had, nursing instinct, maternal instinct, something deeper than either, kept her arms where they were. She turned just enough so Graham could see Archer's face. His breath caught. His son was not gagging. He was not arching his back in that awful, reflexive rejection that had defeated every specialist and every formula for 11 days. He was lying against the stranger's chest with his eyes closed, his jaw moving in a slow, rhythmic pull, and for the first time in his short and brutal life, a faint flush of pink was creeping into his pale cheeks. The gun lowered 2 inches, then 5, then Graham's arm dropped to his side. In the silence, the only sound was the soft, rhythmic, unmistakable pull of a baby finally eating. Graham stood there for a long moment. Then he said very quietly to the man on his left, "Get Henley out of this room. She's done on this assignment." Within the hour, Brooke's entire history was laid out on Graham Colton's desk in the East Wing study. His chief of operations, a terse man named Garner, set a tablet in front of Graham without comment. Brooke Larson, 26, temp placement through a no-background check agency. Nursing license under active suspension. Complaint filed by one Shane Brannock, known associate of a Brighton Beach loan operation. Medical records from Westchester Medical Center. Premature birth, 36 weeks. The infant had survived 9 days. Biologically, she was still producing milk. Graham sat with his hands flat on the desk, looking at the security footage from the nursery. He watched the replay of Brooke moving through the room with the ease that came from years of practice. He watched her curve her body around his son when the guns came out, not fleeing, not dropping the child, but shielding him, instinctively, completely. The debt to the loan operation, Graham said. Clear it tonight. He paused. And find Shane Brannock. I want his current address and schedule. Then have him visited. the kind of visit he doesn't repeat. Garner made a note without expression. The nursing board investigation, Graham continued. Get our legal team on it immediately. I want her license reinstated within 30 days. He looked at the frozen image on screen one more time. She doesn't go back to the temp agency. She doesn't go back to wherever she's been sleeping. Have the North Wing guest suite prepared tonight. And her role? Garner asked. She keeps my son alive, Graham said, whatever that requires. Brooke's life transformed in ways she didn't have language for. She moved from a mattress on a friend's spare room floor to a suite with a bathtub the size of her former living room. A nutritionist on Graham's staff designed her meals specifically around lactation support. She ate real food, slept in a bed that cost more than her car, and spent every waking hour in the nursery with Archer. And Archer flourished. Within 4 days, the color in his cheeks had stabilized into something real and permanent. He began to gain weight at a rate that made Dr. Fielding go quiet in a new way. Not the liability management quiet of before, but the quiet of someone recalibrating an entire clinical framework. By the end of the first week, Archer was opening his eyes with the focused, deliberate attention of a baby who had decided to stick around and get a better look at the world. Graham came to the nursery every evening. He would pull the chair to the far side of the room and simply sit. He rarely initiated conversation, but he sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes for 2 hours. Brooke could feel his presence the way you feel a weather system. Not intrusive, but significant. She was observant by nature, and 4 years in pediatric nursing had sharpened that into something precise. She watched the subtle architecture of the Colton household and found, behind the money and the order, something that didn't sit right. It started with Bernard Colton. Graham's half-brother was 11 years older, silver-haired, and carried himself with the performed ease of someone who had grown up adjacent to money without ever quite controlling it. He came to the estate twice that first week, presenting himself as a concerned family member, checking on the baby. Brooke was in the nursery both times, and both times she caught something in Bernard's expression when he looked at Archer. A micro-flicker, fast and well-controlled. She'd spent 4 years reading the faces of parents in crisis, and she knew the difference between anxiety and calculation. When Bernard's eyes moved to her, they were pleasant and dismissive at once. Remarkable arrangement, he'd said to Graham rather than to her. Glad the boy is stable. He hadn't touched Archer. The unease sharpened on the 6th night. Brooke was in the nursery's attached kitchenette, making tea around midnight. Archer was asleep, monitors steady, the estate quiet. She opened the medical refrigerator for the cream and noticed the row of sealed specialty formula canisters. Graham had insisted on keeping stocked as a contingency. The same organic formula Archer had been rejecting before Brooke arrived. One of the tamper-evident seals was broken. Not torn, not damaged. Carefully lifted, then pressed back down imperfectly, the kind of imperfect you only noticed if you were looking. Brooke picked up the canister. She turned it under the light. She unscrewed the cap. The smell was mostly normal, the bland, sweet dairy of expensive formula. But underneath it, something else. A faint metallic edge, almost herbal, the specific chemical signature of something she had encountered exactly once before, during a toxicology training session in her 2nd year of nursing. A compound designed to disrupt intestinal motility in small quantities. Slow, cumulative, undetectable in standard panels unless you knew to run the exact right screen. The room behind her was quiet. Too quiet, the particular quality of quiet that means someone has stopped breathing normally. Brooke turned around. Standing in the kitchen doorway, still wearing the clothes she'd been dismissed in a week ago, was Nurse Henley. She had a small pistol in her right hand, and the expression on her face was not the scramble of someone caught trespassing. It was something much colder. You should have stayed in your lane, Henley said. You were supposed to be a nobody, a temp maid, in and out before anyone noticed. Brooke's mind ran fast and clinical, the way it had learned to under pressure. Every pediatric floor nurse eventually ran a code blue. You learned that your hands could keep working, even when your body believed it was about to die. You learned to inventory the room. Exits, 1 door, blocked, weapons none. Surfaces, the heavy stainless steel kettle on the counter behind her, freshly boiled for her tea, still hot. You were poisoning him, Brooke said. The formula was already dosed before it was sealed. That's why the toxicology panels didn't catch it. The teams were running standard screens. Something like professional satisfaction moved across Henley's face, which was the worst part. A proprietary formulation. You can't source it in any US database. The symptom profile is indistinguishable from severe gastrointestinal failure in an infant. The specialists from Johns Hopkins looked right at it and wrote unexplained GI dysmotility in their notes. She tilted her head. You walked in here and accidentally fixed the one thing none of them could explain. That wasn't part of the plan. Whose plan? Brooke said. She already knew. She needed it spoken out loud. Henley smiled thinly. Bernard Colton's estate structure has a very specific clause. If the primary heir does not survive past 12 months, the asset portfolio reverts. Graham Colton is childless. The company board restructures. And Bernard, who has been sitting at the advisory table for 16 years with no real authority, finally gets to run what he believes he was always supposed to run. She tilted the gun up to center mass. He hired me 8 months ago. I've been placed with this family in separate engagements before. I know how to move inside their world without being noticed. I was promised $2 million and a very pleasant apartment in Lisbon. Graham will find this, Brooke said. He'll take everything apart until he does. He won't have the chance, Henley said. Because you went off the rails. Grief does that. The board will conclude that a woman in psychological distress, still processing the loss of her own child, became dangerously fixated. A tragedy. The baby will be fine. He'll go back to the formula which I'll be here to prepare. Her finger moved. What 4 years of pediatric nursing gives you, among other things, is the ability to function under adrenaline. You learn it in the first code blue you ever run, that your hands can keep working even when your body is convinced it's about to die. You learn to use exactly what's in the room. Brooke hurled the canister directly into Henley's face. The woman's reflexive flinch pulled the trigger. The shot was suppressed and hit the marble backsplash to Brooke's left, with a sound like cracking ice, sending stone fragments across her shoulder. Brooke didn't stop moving. She grabbed the steel kettle from the counter by its handle and swung it in one full arc, connecting with the side of Henley's head, with a sound she knew she was going to hear for a long time. The scalding water that sloshed out made Henley's scream go high and terrible. The gun skittered across the floor. Brooke kicked it under the island and ran for the nursery door. She didn't have to open it. It came off its upper hinge. Graham Colton stood in the frame. The look on his face was nothing she had seen from him before. Not the cold compression of that first night in the nursery, not the guarded grief of his evening visits. This was something stripped all the way down, a man who had arrived 1 second too late and was calculating what that meant. His security team poured in behind him. Henley was subdued in under 30 seconds. Archer, Brooke said immediately. Check Archer first. Make sure she hadn't already. He's fine. One of the men appeared from the nursery doorway. Sleeping. Monitors are all normal. Brooke's knees went. She slid down the kitchen cabinets and stayed there. Graham crossed the room and crouched in front of her. He had blood on his shirt. His hand, she realized. He'd put it through the door frame to force it open. He didn't seem to notice. He looked at the cut on her cheek from the backsplash fragment, at the tremors working through her hands, and something in his expression did something complicated and private. She poisoned the formula, Brooke said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. It's Bernard. He's behind all of it. Henley told me, hired 8 months ago. There's a clause in the estate structure if Archer doesn't reach 1 year. I know, Graham said quietly. Brooke looked at him. You know. Garner flagged a financial anomaly in Bernard's accounts 3 days ago. Transfers to a Lisbon-based LLC with no traceable operations. I've had his communications monitored since yesterday. Graham's voice was completely flat. I was building the case. I did not know about Henley. He paused. I should have. He said that last part with a weight that told her he intended to carry it for a long time. He reached out and carefully brushed a piece of marble fragment from her hair. She was going to hurt him, Brooke said quietly. I couldn't let that happen. I know, Graham said. He said it differently this time. By 5 in the morning, the east wing of the Colton estate had become something between a command center and a controlled demolition. Garner's team worked through the night, pulling records, securing the tainted formula canisters for evidence, documenting the chain of custody with the precision of people who understood exactly what the coming proceedings would require. At 7, Graham called the company's board chair, a 70-year-old woman named Ruth Chandler who had known Graham's father, and did not take lightly to having her morning disturbed. She took it less lightly once Graham told her what the disturbance was about. An emergency board session was convened for noon. Bernard Colton's legal representation had 12 minutes to prepare a response before the assembled evidence. Financial transfers, recorded communications, compound analysis from the formula canister, and Henley's full statement made a response structurally impossible. Bernard was removed from the advisory board by unanimous vote at 12:47 in the afternoon. Charges were filed by 2. By the time the afternoon sun cut through the east wing windows, Bernard Colton was in a holding room at the Suffolk County Prosecutor's Office, with a defense attorney who had already reviewed the evidence and was quietly recalculating the size of the retainer he was going to require. Brooke didn't know most of this as it happened. She was in the nursery, feeding Archer the way she had been every morning for a week. She heard the distant sound of the estate functioning, cars arriving and leaving, the low register of serious conversations somewhere beyond the closed door, and she kept her attention on the weight of the baby in her arms and the uncomplicated reality of him eating and growing and being entirely, stubbornly fine. Graham came in at 3 in the afternoon. He looked like someone who had been awake for 36 hours and had made productive use of every one of them. He sat in his chair across the room, and for a while neither of them spoke. "Bernard is in custody," he said finally. "The board is restructured. Henley cooperated. She wanted a deal, and what she provided made the case clean enough that the prosecutor was willing to hear it." He paused. "It's done." "Good," Brooke said. She felt him watching her with the same careful attention he brought to everything. "You fought her," he said. "She had a gun aimed at you and you fought her." She was going to hurt Archer. Brooke looked down at the baby, who was asleep against her chest now, sated and heavy and warm. "I wasn't going to let that happen." Graham was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Your license." The board issued a provisional reinstatement this morning. Garner's team submitted the full file last night. The board reviewed it on an emergency basis given the circumstances. The complaint Shane Brannock filed has been formally withdrawn, with legal consequence to him for the false report. Brooke closed her eyes. "Thank you," she said, because it was the only thing she had that came close to proportional. "Don't," Graham said, not unkindly. "You saved my son's life twice in 6 days. Making phone calls is the least significant thing I have ever done." He stood, crossed the room, and stopped a few feet from where Brooke sat with Archer. He looked at his son. Really looked. The way she had watched him slowly learn to do over the past week. The way fathers had to learn when a baby came before the grief had anywhere to land. "I want to ask you something," Graham said. "I need you to understand that however you answer, everything else stands. The license, the debt, Brannock, that's already done. This is separate." Brooke looked up at him. "Stay," he said. "Not as staff, not as a wet nurse on contract." He stopped. He was not a man who left sentences unfinished. She'd noticed that about him, the precise economy of how he spoke, and watching him search for the right words now was like watching someone do something physically demanding. "Because my son knows your voice better than he knows mine. Because this house has been a building with furniture in it for 3 months, and in the last week it has started to feel like something that might become a home." His jaw worked. "Because I don't want you to leave." Brooke looked at Archer. His small chest rose and fell with the easy, unconscious confidence of a baby who had never once worried about breathing. His cheek was round now, flushed pink, nothing like the translucent fragility of the child she'd first lifted 11 days ago. She had come to this estate with nothing. A bound chest and a borrowed uniform, and the particular hollowness of a woman who had outlasted the thing she was supposed to be keeping alive. She looked up at Graham Colton, who was watching her with the same expression he'd had in the nursery doorway the night before, stripped down and honest, no performance anywhere in it. "Okay, I'll stay." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the structural change that comes before one, the kind that, once you've seen it on a person's face, you understand they don't show it often and they don't show it to everyone. He reached down and touched the top of Archer's head with one hand, gently, the way he was still learning to do. Then his hand moved, just slightly, and came to rest against Brooke's shoulder. Steady and warm, and carrying the quiet, careful weight of something asking to be allowed to stay. She let it. Across the room, Archer slept on, perfectly content, entirely unaware that an empire had been nearly dismantled in his name and saved instead, by the woman his father was only just beginning to learn how to deserve.